The following is an HDNet original presentation.
First thing that strikes you when you drive around Detroit is the number of abandoned buildings. The ghosts of a city that was. Early in 2009, I came here to investigate the city's failing public schools for my weekly television news program. But when my team and I started digging, we found a story that was much more complex than we had imagined. So we decided to spend a year documenting a school district in crisis and the students who are trapped in the system with nowhere else to go.
Back in the school. Everybody back in Mr. Ward's office.
We can't go.
What we do? Let's go. Because you should be in school or gone home. That's what.
No.
Man.
And we was going back to the school. I used to see how they treat me.
We're back to the school.
At Osborne School, 800 or 900 students come in as ninth graders. By the time they're 10th graders, it's down to 545 students. By the time they reach 11th grade, it's down to 345 students. When this same cohort reached 12th grade, it's 245 students to graduate. And by then they've had to take the high stakes test, the MEP test, in the four main areas, and remember it's minimum competencies. 11 students, 11 passed the MEP test. What are the other 780 students going to do for employment? The economics of poverty have devastated Detroit, and without a successful public education system, like most of the urban centers, they're not going to make it.
The children is not first when it comes to Detroit public schools. Some of them, when they graduate from high school, they still can't read, they still can't add, subtract.
They don't care if you're gonna learn. They will not show you how to do it or nothing.
One of my teachers told me if I come to his class, he said he would just pass me if I just show up and shut up. They say they make their money whether we learn or not.
And if the teachers don't care because they feel like you don't care, you feel like, what's the point? Why should I come here every single day and waste my time and waste your time?
Our country's educational system is broken. That's probably not news to you. Scan the headlines in the paper, magazine covers, television news reports.
The failure in American education.
And if there's a story about American public education, you're likely to hear the word crisis.
These test scores seem to be going down every year.
Test scores are low.
Students returning to class this week are less likely to finish high school than their parents.
Dropout rates are high.
We can't teach with 50 students in a class.
Classrooms are overcrowded.
There's a major difference between the graduation rates of white students and black students.
The gap between the educational haves and the have-nots is growing.
We feel this huge sense of urgency. In this country, we have a 25% dropout rate.
Those who urge reform see the status quo and say it's the product of decades of neglect, and that we as Americans can no longer afford to look the other way, that we must do a far better job of educating our youth if we want to be competitive in the world economy, if we want to make sure our children and our children's children continue to enjoy a standard of living we have come to take for granted.
And so I'd like to just open up and have a bit of a conversation.
In May 2009, President Obama's newly appointed Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, took this message to Detroit to direct national attention to a city whose very name has become synonymous with economic blight, urban decay, failed school.
God, I am tired of that argument. I don't have to go to Detroit to know that it smells.
The city's become a punchline in the popular culture for jokes about the worst of the worst.
Take him to Detroit.
No! No, not Detroit! No! No, please!
Many journalists have come to Detroit to take pictures of abandoned buildings and to write earnest essays about what's wrong here. They often call the city a ghost town. Detroiters are understandably defensive over outsiders coming here and criticizing their city.
You could make a pretty good case, unfortunately, that Detroit is ground zero education in this country.
Arne Duncan had a lot to say about Detroit's failing schools, but one phrase he used drowned out all the others.
What is going on in Detroit is an educational disgrace.
He called the Detroit public schools a national disgrace. Many people here were offended that their city was singled out, but perhaps Secretary Duncan wasn't so much pointing the finger at them. Maybe he was pointing at all of us for allowing something like this to happen.
I mean, if we'd have been wiped out by a hurricane here, everybody would be flocking here to tell the story of Detroit and how bad things are and how children are being cheated. Because this has been sort of a self-inflicted rolling disaster over the last 20 years, nobody really seems to care about us here anymore.
Nolan Finley writes a biweekly column and runs the editorial page at the Detroit News. For years, he has been a sharp critic of Detroit's public schools, known locally as DPS.
Dropout rates have gone up, student achievement rates have gone down. Detroit schools, in a nutshell, are not doing the job they're assigned to do, which is educating the children of this city.
In 2009, Detroit public school students scored the worst results ever recorded on the NAEP test. The National Assessment of Educational Progress serves as the nation's report card for student achievement. Detroit was at the bottom of the list of big city schools, with 73% of fourth graders below basic skill level. No students had advanced scores. And the same year, Education Week magazine created a stir when it said Detroit's high school graduation rate was only 26%. The district challenged that finding, saying the true rate was much higher. But no matter how you parse the data, the legacy of failure is clear. Nearly half of the adults in Detroit are functionally illiterate.
With that high a dropout rate and that high a failure rate, I don't understand why the civil rights lawyers aren't lined up over here on the steps of the federal courthouse demanding these kids get their right to a quality education.
Any system that's only graduating 25% of its students and half of those cannot read is a failed system.
We often heard local advocates for education refer to the plight of their schools as an unfinished civil rights struggle. But where the civil rights struggles of decades past galvanized entire cities, community events like this one at the New Bethel Baptist Church on Detroit's west side were sparsely attended. But those who did show up were passionate.
We don't have to fill this church in order to make changes in the lives of our children. So it's okay. We're freedom riders. That's what we are tonight. So join with me as we start talking about solutions and resolutions to some of the issues that are impacting our children and impacting our community. This is our community. These are our children. And as they say, it does take a village, but we also know we need to watch who's in the village as well.
I feel that I have a right to go to that school and complain about the way my kids are being educated.
They're missing critical thinking skills. They're missing communication skills.
My objective is to blow up the system
and start over, because the system in place does not work.
And I live in this community, and as I looked around as a father, I was very dissatisfied because I thought Detroit would be a different community than what it is now. And it's not. For me as a child, it was a beacon of hope for African Americans to demonstrate to the world that we could raise out of slavery and run something for ourselves in our own way, and it's not happening.
Today, Detroit is one of the poorest cities in the country. Jobs here are scarce, and the real unemployment rate may be as high as 50%. More than 3/4 of Detroit public school children are so poor they qualify for free or reduced price lunches. Neighborhoods are empty, and most businesses have long since folded or moved to the suburbs.
You guys are shooting the area. We got one of our coast schools right here that's really tore up. Literally, the backside's open.
Okay.
Just be safe, okay?
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
More than half the city's schools have been closed, abandoned, and forgotten. Many are beautiful, hardy brick structures, often still bursting with textbooks and supplies. The files and records of students long gone, still intact in vandalized classrooms.
Detroit is unsurpassed for opportunity and growth. There is a renaissance, a rebirth in the city. There's a newness in Detroit.
There was a time, not so long ago, that Detroit shook with optimism.
Detroit, an exciting place to be, to live, to grow, to work shoulder to shoulder, regardless of national origin, color, or creed.
The Motor City was once the 4th largest in the United States. It boasted vibrant department stores and world-class art museums.
The inner city is becoming an exciting place to live.
A bustling, prosperous metropolis.
Convenient to shops, offices, and the most modern of schools.
With a population of 2 million and nearly 400,000 students in its schools, the city was multiracial and middle class. But by the time this promotional film was made in 1965, the seeds for Detroit's decline had already been planted.
Part of the lure of the suburb is in the greater elbow room it offers.
White flight, with its movement of jobs and wealth to the suburbs, was well underway.
4 days of rioting, looting, and arson rocked the city of Detroit in the worst outbreak of urban racial violence this year.
July 1967, race riots engulfed the city. 43 people dead and over 1,000 injured.
Entire blocks of homes become infernos, and damage topped the $500 million mark. Governor Romney declares a state of emergency. The city's industry and business are severely affected. Sniper groups use day and night hit-and-run tactics before tanks move in to curb their window and rooftop barrage.
But racial mistrust had always been strong in Detroit.
We built the country up and we'll burn it down, honkies and all.
Hey, Mr. Brown, did you tell them to burn down that school?
Be serious, I ain't got to tell black folks what to burn.
For decades, blacks and whites had lived in different, segregated neighborhoods and gone to their own schools. It was an unspoken segregation. But in 1970, the school board passed a busing plan to desegregate the high schools. Detroit's remaining white population fought the measure hard, and they weren't alone. The anti-busing fervor rocked the country. In the Detroit suburb of Pontiac, Michigan, 10 school buses were torched and anger spilled out into the streets. Detroit's busing plan was shelved, and the NAACP went to court. Then came a decision that rattled the city. A federal judge ruled that the only way to break down the barriers of race in Detroit's increasingly African-American schools was to use busing to integrate them with dozens of white suburban school districts. The white suburbs revolted, passing resolutions to try to stave off the court order, and the issue became national.
Arguments next in number 73-434, Milliken against Bradley.
The landmark case, known as Milliken versus Bradley, reached the Supreme Court in 1974, and in a contentious 5-4 decision, the justices overturned the lower court ruling. There would be no busing between Detroit and her suburbs. The city line became a line of racial divide, separating Detroit's public schools from the mostly white suburban schools.
The court today takes a giant step backwards.
In a stinging dissent, Justice Thurgood Marshall railed against what he saw as systematic injustice.
The Detroit School Board consciously drew school attendance zones along lines which maximized the segregation of races in their schools.
He felt the ruling was a perversion of Brown versus Board of Education, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that school segregation on the basis of race was unconstitutional.
The very evil that Brown was aimed at will not be cured, but will be perpetuated.
And today, more than 50 years after Brown, Detroit's public schools are 88% African American and only 2% white. But race is only part of the story. As Detroit has become poorer and its schools worse, many African Americans who have the means to move elsewhere or send their children to private school have done exactly that. And that line around Detroit that used to separate blacks and whites now segregates by economic class as well.
So it's not just white flight. Blacks have left, black professionals that fear for their children's safety, that want police to come more timely, that want to just walk and enjoy their neighborhood.
And want to have a good school.
And want to have a good school. They've left.
And that has meant that teachers like Sherry Gay-Dagnogo see mostly students from poor homes whose parents themselves have a limited education.
It's disheartening because we know that everybody doesn't come from a perfect setting. Everybody doesn't have a support system in place that ensures their success.
Well, did you have parent-teacher conferences?
Oh, yes.
Were they well attended?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't know. I just wish that parents could consider the impact that they have on their children when they're not there and not supporting them.
Did your students, by and large, did they read at grade level or near grade level?
I would venture to say the majority of the class could not read. Thank God we do have audio CDs to let the students listen.
Because they couldn't read the book.
Could not read.
It's all part of a vicious cycle. Children who come from homes where they aren't prepared for education, who then fail in school, and then have children of their own, doomed to repeat the process. That's how you get a city where roughly half of the adult population is functionally illiterate.
In our city, in our community, I don't know where people get this. They want to mask the truth. It's often stated, don't air our dirty laundry in the public. It's swinging real high. So the dirty laundry is already out there. We have to change the conversation in such a way that it impacts change in our culture.
Well, let's try starting what you would consider to be the necessary new conversation. How does it start?
Being honest about our dropout rate, being honest about our illiteracy rate, being honest about the support that needs to be in place. What mechanisms have to be put in place to make sure we bring a child that's at a third grade reading level to their proper 8th grade, 7th grade reading level?
Oh, that's irritating.
I know it is, but it works. I don't like screaming, that's my chime.
We've been working on some vocabulary and nobody's here. So what am I supposed to do?
You got caught in the catch-22 because you didn't have a what. And you have to have a what to beware.
There's nothing wrong with the children. The children are okay. The children can learn. We just haven't put them in the right environment here. Even though we know the models that work, even though we have models that work, we can look around us and see schools that are doing better.
Finley points to schools like University Prep in downtown Detroit, run by people like Doug Ross. Ross is a former politician who decided he wanted to try his hand at improving public education in Detroit. The official name of University Prep is University Preparatory Academy, and that's how it sees its mission, preparing its students for higher education.
No one knew who would be chosen.
with an early foundation in reading. Founded a decade ago, it now has students from kindergarten through 12th grade. Their test scores are many points higher than their peers in other Detroit schools and much closer to the Michigan state average. University Prep graduates almost all of its students each year, 95% in 2010. And even more impressive, nearly all of them go on to college. But University Prep isn't a traditional public school. It's a charter school, which places it at the center of an educational debate that stretches across the United States. What's the difference between a charter school and a public school?
It's really just how they're governed. It's like saying, what's better, a publicly held corporation or a privately held? You'd say, well, I don't know, show me the company, I'll tell you if it's any good. It's not an education philosophy. It just means you are independently governed public school, which gives you the chance to innovate, and some chartered schools take advantage of it. A charter is just a contract to run a public school.
Many charter school proponents would have you believe that these schools are the ultimate solution to our national education crisis, but the data doesn't really support that. Not all charter schools perform as well as University Prep. A recent Stanford University study found that only 17% of charter schools nationwide provide superior education opportunities for their students. 37% deliver results that are significantly worse than the traditional public schools. What about the argument, and I've heard this, that charter schools talk the good talk, but they don't actually walk the walk, that charter schools don't do a better job?
If you do the same thing that the failing public school down the street does in your chartered school, you get exactly the same results. A chartered school is an opportunity to innovate.
It's a lot better because it charters students versus Detroit public schools. You can pass with all D's.
We don't have a lot of security guards. We don't have to go through metal detectors. We just come in and then we just know what we're supposed to do.
If I was in like a Detroit public school, like I wouldn't have no focus. Like our teachers, like they stay on us, make sure we're going on the right track in life and stuff like that.
In 2003, a local philanthropist, Bob Thompson, offered $200 million to create 15 more charter schools in Detroit like University Prep. Supporters of the plan saw it as an opportunity to give some 6,000 additional Detroit students a chance for a better education. The school district firmly said, no thank you. Critics like Nolan Finley blasted the decision. Why would a district with such problems turn down an offer to build more schools based on a model that seemed to be working? Granted, the national picture for charter school performance may be murky, but University Prep has posted much better educational results than the majority of Detroit's public schools.
We can look to other cities where things are being done to address this crisis. And then you come to Detroit, and we're so interested in protecting the status quo, so interested in protecting the parasites who feed off of these schools that we won't change a thing here.
Who are those parasites?
Well, you can start with the teachers' unions, you can start with the contractors, you can start with the school board. The education performance of these children, that's at the bottom of the priority list for this school board and for this city. The political structure of the city is all wrapped up in the school board. You know, their friends have jobs, their spouses have jobs. No one has an incentive to change.
Coming in, I was not given a single document by the school board. Not a policy, not a 5-year plan, not academic goals, not a budget. I wasn't given any information, so it meant I was starting at ground zero.
We first met Dr. Connie Calloway when she was nearing the end of a tumultuous 18 months as superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools, a tenure marked by fierce fights with Detroit's elected school board.
Well, I heard the superintendent say that she said something back that I did not hear her say. I called the question.
Today, I don't know which side she's working for. I raised the same question. That is what I said in the back room.
From the beginning, Dr. Calloway says she found a district operating dishonestly and without accountability. When you got there, what shocked you most about the Detroit schools?
The complete absence of any process or organization. For example, when I got there, the district was overinflating its enrollment by between 5,000 and 10,000 students. And over the past years, Detroit has gone from 300,000 students to its current enrollment of 95,000. They lose between 5,000 and 10,000 students per year.
Public schools are funded by your tax dollars. If a district lies about its numbers, they get more money. So inflating enrollment is a form of fraud. And an honest accounting meant Callaway would have to make cuts.
And for at least 2 years, Detroit had not maintained a staff seniority list. So how does one know who should be the first to be laid off? And that complete absence of fundamental systems and organization was a shock to me.
Callaway told us she was determined to channel that shock into action. But first, she needed a detailed picture of the school district, one based on hard facts. And the picture she got back was ugly. She found the district was still paying expensive utility bills on shuttered schools years after they'd been closed. She discovered test scores in writing had declined by an alarming 23% over a 3-year period. And she was shocked to find that there had been no evaluations of district employees for more than a decade. Callaway's findings totaled almost 1,400 pages. She felt she now had what she needed to begin to make a change in DPS.
This notebook provides the baseline data that I never received. It is a building profile of every single school in the district, with the number of students, with the attendance. It is an evaluation form. All of the employees in the district were evaluated.
But when she handed out copies to members of the school board, she says most of them didn't seem to care about what she'd found.
In looking in hindsight at the barriers, at the obstacles that were thrown in my path, I believe it was chaos by design.
Chaos is one thing. Chaos by design is another thing.
Yes, indeed.
Who designed this chaos and why?
It's been years in the making, Mr. Rather. I don't think that it happened just with this board. I think that this board carried on business the way that it had been done.
This meeting is called to order. This meeting is being held pursuant to Section 5.2 of the employment contract between the board and Dr. Callaway.
Callaway and the school board clashed from the start, and in December 2008, the board voted to terminate her contract. This public hearing was held 2 months later. Let's put this as directly as possible. In your judgment and based on your experience, why were you fired after only 18 months on the job in Detroit?
They bottom line said, she's changing too much, she's interfering with our money, and they said to me, you interfered with our money, we'll interfere with yours.
Her termination hearing was a formality. But in front of a packed room of supporters and activists, Dr. Callaway was determined to throw all of her frustrations back at the school board.
I fought desperately for this district. 70% of my time was spent jumping through hoops with the Board of Education. The board approved this program when we are in deficit and we don't have funds and don't have textbooks. To this day, I have no idea what the board's budget is, and they shut me down. I was not allowed to speak at board meetings. They put their hands in my face. They gabbled me. They called me out of my name.
Thank you. Thank you.
When she came in, I thought she was awesome. I thought she was the best thing that happened to this district since my children have started going to school. And you know, when they got rid of her, I just lost, I lost all hope after that.
Now that the testimony has been concluded, that concludes this hearing. Thank you.
I feel like they didn't want her here because she had exposed some of the things that were going on, and especially when it came to that money.
It was you all, it was this district that robbed these kids of their education. The payroll person needs to be locked up. Needs to be locked up. You can't tell me whoever it was didn't know 500 people was not budgeted? That's ridiculous.
By the time Dr. Callaway arrived in the summer of 2007, the press and the public were becoming acutely aware of some serious financial malfeasance plaguing the district. In particular, the FBI was investigating a contract kickback scheme run out of the district's central offices. At least $46 million appears to have vanished in a series of mysterious wire transfers. But that was only what the public read in the papers. District insiders experienced fraud and mismanagement on a scale that defied belief.
I worked at DPS for 4.5 years. The kids were never a top priority. The kids were never a top priority, because if they were, then you wouldn't spend $40 million moving into a facility that you can't justify and then pay rent on top of that.
Separate and apart from the FBI's investigation, Lacan Oguntoyinbo is talking about yet another multi-million-dollar scandal, the details of which have only recently come to light. It all centers around the 30-story Fisher Building, one of Detroit's most luxurious. In 2002, the district decided its existing headquarters were inadequate, but rather than stay in a building they already owned, they bought 5 floors here and gave a no-bid contract for renovations.
You're spending $40 million to move into these new swank facilities when you could have stayed at the older facility which you owned and spent maybe $5, $10, or $15 million to fix it up.
The price tag is all the more shocking when you realize that the entire Fisher Building had sold the previous year for $3 million less than DPS paid for just 5 floors of it. But it doesn't end there.
They were spending money, as a friend of mine used to put it, like drunken sailors.
Much of the space DPS bought was still occupied by other tenants and would be for years to come. So the school district agreed to spend $2 million per year to rent space in the building next door.
It's not a good thing when you work at a place that you're ashamed of. There's some things I could have done differently. One thing I could have done differently is I could have said, well, I see a lot of things that are not right. Maybe I should make an appointment and talk to the feds and blow the whistle a little bit. I didn't do that, and I regret that.
In June 2009, Oguntoyinbo wrote a fiery whistleblowing editorial for the Detroit News. In it, he listed scam after scam he said he'd witnessed firsthand, such as a prominent local critic of Detroit's public schools who was put on the district payroll at $25,000 per month.
Vociferous critic of the district. And the only thing I could conclude from that was this was a payoff to keep him quiet, because during that time he did not criticize the school district.
With allegations of fraud and mismanagement swirling about, the district was earning a reputation as an ungovernable mess, and it was having a hard time keeping superintendents.
I was the 7th superintendent to be hired in 9 years, and even more critical, there had been 4 chief financial officers prior to the one that I brought in.
When Connie Calloway was hired in 2007, they practically had to beg someone to take the superintendent's job, even though it paid $250,000 a year. A nationwide search had netted fewer than 20 applicants. Did you know when you took the job what you were getting into?
I read the news. I was aware that there was a federal investigation into the federal funds in the district. $47 million that was electronically wired out of the district over a 3-month period. I was aware that they had gone from a state takeover to an elected board. Yes, I was aware of those problems that were common knowledge to the public at the time that I took over. There were other more insidious issues in terms of the politics that I wasn't fully aware of.
Good evening, everyone.
Any discussion of politics and the Detroit schools has to start with the elected school board.
I'm not even going to greet this board. They have completely and utterly failed us, because I came here to raise hell. Do you hear me?
In meeting after meeting, the resentment and dissatisfaction from parents and activists surges to the surface.
Why don't you all get up, move out of that office downtown, and move into one of these buildings that y'all got just sitting there? I don't know how you sleep at night.
Kimberly Bishop has put 5 children through DPS. She says she finds herself appalled at the board's dysfunction.
Typical school board meeting usually lasts around maybe 5 to 6 hours, sometimes a little longer.
You know what? Security, that's the last time. I'm asking you please to assist me. Elder needs to leave. We do not attack other members of the audience. It's rude and unnecessary.
I have seen some go to 2 in the morning.
But Grand Home.
Your time is up, Elder.
But Grand Home.
Elder, your time is up.
I heard you the first time.
Public comments are limited to 2 minutes, so people try to make the most of it.
Brown versus Board of Education said that separate can never ever be equal. Yet our schools are just as segregated as they were 100
Ms.
years
Smith,
ago.
that completes your time. Thank you.
We can.
Ms. Smith, thank you.
It's usually a lot of arguing, bickering amongst the school board members.
A copy of code to each assistant.
How you gonna do that if you...
Member Thornton.
How are you gonna do that if you... This is a way of trying to control what I print and what I copy.
A lot of what is discussed has little to do with what's happening in the classroom.
We have reams and reams and reams of paper that has disappeared from the board office without any idea of where it's going. Majority of the board do not use the copier in the board office.
All of it while the public waits.
And we can't hear you anyway.
And you never come out of there with any solutions to any of the problems that Detroit Public School faces.
How is they gonna copy?
When are we going to stop and think about our children and stop thinking about our damn selves? Got your own agendas. You don't care about the kids, and you still haven't answered my question. Why?
Typically, one thinks of a board as meeting once a month. When I was hired, the Detroit Board of Education was meeting 22 times a month.
Wait a minute. 22 times a month the school board met?
They have committees, 11 committees, and these committees have closed sessions where they meet and discuss items for the agenda. Then each committee has an open session with the public.
I showed up, there was no action.
Who asked you?
Madam
See,
President.
that's working behind closed doors.
Madam President, I think part of the
Remember,
question.
if you cut the deal behind closed doors and the rest of the board don't know about it, this is what you get.
Member Thornton, I gave you the chance to give your opinion, now I'm giving mine.
This is suicide.
But I have a right to my opinion, Member Thornton. You spoke what you wanted to say, now it's my turn. And so I think that...
Describe for me a typical board meeting.
Lawlessness. They are not governed by anyone. We come in and board members go in a back room where they have ordered meals for themselves, and they're back there while I'm sitting at the table with the public waiting.
I don't know what you're doing in that back room and with lawyers and whatever, but the public is not very happy with what we see.
At one time, the president of the board challenged someone in the audience to a fight. There's one member who turns to the public and said, "Did you hear what Mrs. Butterworth said?" That's the name they called me. But these members said whatever they wanted, and there is no one to govern them.
I don't know what you're doing. You're selling our schools to who knows who. People are coming up here making deals right in front of us.
Mr. Bernard,
it's
you're
a
done.
pause. No, I'm not done.
You're not reading any no, Mr. Bernard, you please security, please escort him out.
Get your hands off. You can tell You're going to get sued. You're going to get sued. You're going to get sued.
Your time is up.
No, you stepped in on my
Your time is up.
No. But you can do something. Stupid hole.
Security.
And what, you gonna put me out?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I've been put out of bed whole houses. She full of shit. Keeping her sister with a damn job.
It was the most demeaning, unprofessional experience, Mr. Rather, but I look at it and I say, if this is how the adults are treated, it is a social justice issue in that you very seldom heard board members mention children or anything for children.
You know, for so long, things have been covered up in this district, and they wanted her out. They don't have the children's interests at heart. We know this because if they did, our children would be learning something in school today.
The educational experience is not that great. I mean, the kids don't come to class on time, and we use 25 minutes out of the class to get the class to shut up anyway.
We first met Deanna Williams in the winter of her junior year outside Henry Ford High School. Sadly, in many ways, it's a typical school in Detroit. Attendance is spotty, the graduation rate is low, and test scores suggest almost no students are performing anywhere near grade level.
So I don't really see the point of being here, but I'm here because I want to go to college, and I don't see how this is going to prepare me for college.
What is your dream? What do you want to do with your professional life?
I want to be a librarian and a writer. That is all I have ever wanted to do since I was little. Something to do with books.
Well, that's not so wild a dream.
To some, it might not be, but it's my dream.
Well, what are you doing to prepare yourself for that? You said you read a lot.
I certainly do. Last year, I helped out in the library on my free periods. I used to code and shelf books, check out books, and like search for lost books. It was like the most fun I had ever had in my life.
And you like to write?
Yes. I write all the time. It's like getting my thoughts down on paper so I don't have to think about them anymore. It's like dredging up old memories is really tiring. It's like I just wrote it down. Do I really have to tell you again?
Deanna's life hasn't been easy. Like many in Detroit, she has grown up on the brink of poverty.
No, put some vegetables on broccoli, Brussels sprouts.
Brussels sprouts?
Yeah.
You want vegetables?
I want some. Y'all don't have to eat it, but I want some.
You're weird, lady. That is not an American meal.
They're a family of three. Deanna, her younger sister Isis, and their mother Katina.
Wait a minute, you have to be at school at 7:30?
They've moved from rented house to rented house in rough, dangerous neighborhoods.
Y'all having burgers tonight. Tomorrow we have liver and onions.
But home, the girls told us, has mostly been a happy place. And as we got to know them, we found a tight-knit family bond.
If you spent any time with both of them, you would just laugh. Even Deanna has a dry sense of humor. Isis would just crack you up. And then you put us in the room together and it's like, where in the world did that come from? Right, basically.
Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr.
Do you know what they did for the world?
Play music.
Isis is the funny one. I'm the one that at least tries to keep up with what's going on in the world. My mom is the one who brings in the culture in the house. Brussels sprouts. Oh, yeah. I keep you on track, sweetie. She took us to plays and stuff, and we used to go downtown and all this, and we never really had the money to do a lot of stuff.
I don't know what that is.
But we have enough, and we take care of each other.
Are you burning something?
Probably.
That's the Brussels sprouts. I took them off the heat. The smell should be coming in now.
Ice. Oh. Nana. Up.
Any comprehensive discussion of our public schools would be incomplete if it only examined what happens in the classroom or the district office.
Come on.
We are, after all, talking about children, and a child's education begins at home.
Tell me how your day goes. Take me from the very beginning. What time do you get up? What do you do?
Okay. I wake up 4:45 a.m. every morning. Nana, are you up? Deanna. She up. As soon as I get done with her hair, put no shoes on, we're gonna leave. It's 5:30, I'm walking out the door, 2 blocks to the bus stop and to work. I get to work by 6:30.
You don't have a car?
No.
Have you ever had a car?
No. No.
How do they get to school?
Bus. They're gonna catch the same bus I catch to work.
That's a city bus?
Yes, a city bus.
There's no school bus?
No. We are too far from Henry Ford now for the school bus to come and get them.
As the number of students has dropped in Detroit, the district has closed over 100 schools in the last decade. This means many students are forced to attend schools that are far from their homes, taking multiple buses to get there. Deanna and her family used to live closer to school. But that house was so small, Katina slept in the basement so her daughters could have their own rooms. This house is bigger, but there's always a trade-off.
Is it a better neighborhood?
Every neighborhood has some issues. Within this past week, there was a shooting at the end of the block.
That's an issue.
Yeah.
And this was pretty close.
Oh, right at the corner, down the street from me. Pennies, singles, and tens.
Yeah.
And you're good.
All right.
Scan your thing again.
What do you do at Target?
I am the cash office specialist.
You count money?
I count money.
I draw a deep breath and I hesitate to ask this question.
Mhm.
But give me a range of your total income a year.
On a good 2 weeks is maybe $400 or $500 every 2 weeks.
That's take home.
Yes.
After taxes,
That's
after
after
Social
taxes.
Security.
What bus is that?
Next to downtown, that's what I need.
Apparently, they're saying that these are the bus routes going to close. No buses on Saturday after 6 and no buses at all on Sunday.
That's part of the city's effort
That's
to
on
reduce their costs.
Right. In a cab, it's like almost $30.
You can't afford that, can you?
No, absolutely not.
Are you aware of how much your mother has dreamed for you?
Yes. I'm also aware of how much she gave up for me. She wanted to join the military, and she wanted to go to college and do all that stuff. And before it was time for her to graduate, she found out she was pregnant. And I saw the graduation picture, and under the red robe, you can see her belly, and it's like, why in the world would you give that up for me? I have done some junk. And I asked her recently, like, what makes a parent love their child?
So for the semester, I have to have had a 2.0 and
read the rest of it. It says you will be expected
to provide 20 hours of service.
My dream changed. My time is to make sure their dreams come to fulfillment. That they become more, that no matter what happens, that they know I'm there to help push them along.
But for all of her pushing and prodding, Katina told us she knows there's only so much she can do alone to keep her daughters on the path to success. What would you say to a school board member if he or she were standing here in my place?
As much as you care, what are you doing to make a change in the DPS system? What are you doing, and what are you trying to get the rest of the board members to do to help the DPS kids? Because right now, as much as you care, it's not working. When they were in elementary school, they had projects for science. We did Mount Vesuvius and everything. When they were in elementary school, they had all these projects, was like, get them, they were so excited to do these projects. She get to middle school, there's no projects. There's no science fair. There's none of that. And I asked the science teacher, why haven't there been any projects? He says that he can't get the kids to mine, so he canceled them. She stayed out that 1 year, and I took her out of that school. Because her grades went from straight A's when she was in elementary school to D's and F's.
Emerson had the worst reputation of a middle school ever, anywhere. There were fights in the hallway, sex in the hallways in middle school with middle school children. For the better half of a year, I did not have a social studies teacher. We would go into the classroom and the lights would be off and nobody was in there for the better half of the year.
Seems almost unbelievable.
It might seem that way, but it's the truth.
Deanna continued to struggle academically at Emerson Middle School. But even though she was getting D's and F's in her classes, she tested in to one of Detroit's 3 high schools for honor students. Unfortunately, she says, Martin Luther King High School was too far from her home. It would be another setback. Deanna says she thinks a lot about how the schools have failed her and says she's still angry about her time back in middle school when everything started to go wrong.
My teacher would drink in the classroom, drink Smirnoff. He smelled like liquor and Black and Mild, which is a cigar. Right. My mom came up to the school for parent-teacher conference, and she thought he was a janitor or something because he was wearing a dirty t-shirt and dirty jeans, trying to talk to her about what I was doing in class.
But he was drinking vodka in class?
Yes.
Well, you say yes, but you're old enough to know that's not normal, not anywhere near normal.
No, it's not. And it's sad because he didn't really care. He was just knocking them back in the classroom. Security guards would walk past the kids on the stairs having sex. I would walk past kids on the stairs having sex.
There would be oral sex in the back of the classroom. Teacher didn't really care what was going on. She was just, trying to get the class to shut up long enough for her to get 2 words out.
There are going to be people who are watching and listening to this and saying, well, this young woman must have made this up. It didn't really happen.
I don't have to make it up.
It happened.
It happened.
It was real.
Yes.
We had a self-inflicted gun wound to a student. We had numerous locker fires, bomb threats. A gun went off in the classroom. I obtained a fractured jaw being hit with brass knuckles.
This is the principal of Finney High School, addressing the graduating class of 2009.
There was an in-school beating of a person that resulted in a death.
If we ever doubted the truthfulness of student reports about what happens inside Detroit public schools, his matter-of-fact list of what these graduates had endured during their 4 years at Finney certainly made us pay attention.
Students have died tragically, but we all stayed together, and we all made it through. I congratulate this senior class.
In an effort to keep students in and violence out, Finney High School had taken the drastic step of building a chain-link fence around the entire school building. The symbolism was not lost on the students.
It's pointless because I look at it like they locking us in. Like we have no type of freedom.
It's like we're animals. You cage us in like animals, they gonna act like animals, you know?
That's how they act. But by putting a cage around Finney, it's making them think like, well, that's a representation of how they feel about us.
We met brothers Darius and DeMarco Kraft when they were students at Finney. They were both star football players, and they told us it was their devotion to the team that kept them coming to school every day.
DeMarco Kraft.
DeMarco was one of the graduates of this class. He went on to Alabama State University, but he told us he wasn't sure his high school diploma truly signified academic accomplishment.
I don't feel that we're being prepared for college to the best of our abilities. I think it could be a lot more done. We could succeed higher if we were to get better in education, but it's mediocre. It'll get you by, you know.
The boys told us that many of their teachers just recited lessons from worksheets and textbooks, and that the students had few chances for any hands-on learning.
You might get that one teacher in English class, she may give you one essay. But like a lot of schools, you have essays for every class, like biology, you might have a science project or something. No science, I've never done a science project since I've been in Finney.
There's certain stuff in the classroom we can't even touch, and it's supposed to be for the class. But people steal like scissors or tweezers, and we don't, I done one experiment in chemistry, and we didn't even finish.
A chemistry class without a single lab. That wouldn't be allowed in most high schools, but in Detroit, the students we talked to seemed resigned to the reality of the way their schools are run. They don't have to travel a great distance, just over the Detroit city lines, to see suburban schools that are far different from theirs. It's a legacy that stretches back the decades to white flight, to the Milliken Supreme Court case. The students in Detroit may not know all of the history, but they have a keen sense of the injustice.
It's not fair that you see kids in Southfield and Waterford and all this, and they have computers in their classrooms, and they have new textbooks I've never even seen before. And I go to the biggest district, and they can't even afford to give us a quality education or the kind of education that other kids are getting. And it's frustrating to know that I can be learning all of these things, and I can be doing all of these things, and I can't. And people think that the children in Detroit public schools are stupid and brutish because of what they see on television. And it's not true. We want to learn. We want to be able to do what the other children are doing. We want to have the same opportunities, but they keep taking them away from us. it's like they're keeping us down, and then you find out that the people who are supposed to be looking after us, after our well-being, they're stealing from us. And every day I want to know why. Why is this happening?
To even begin to develop an answer to Deanna's question, you have to step back and look at the economic realities of Detroit. The decline of the auto industry has forever altered the city's landscape. Factories that now sit empty once beckoned with thousands of good-paying union jobs. For much of the 20th century, you didn't need a high school diploma to live the American dream. You could drop out, hit the factory floor, and earn enough money to support your family well. That era has passed, and there aren't very many new jobs to fill the void. But despite the decline of the city, the public schools themselves aren't exactly poor. With a budget of over $1 billion a year, DPS is the largest single employer in the city. We're talking about teachers, janitors, secretaries in the central office, not to mention all the millions of dollars in contracts the district doles out to vendors who provide services to the schools. Former Superintendent Connie Calloway says it's been a lucrative system for those who are connected.
You don't have to be competent. They call it the Friends and Family Plan.
Is that a well-known phrase in the school district?
Yes, it is. They joke, that's what they said to me. One of the board members said to me, "Welcome to hell."
Calloway believes that her attempts to gain control over district personnel and vendor contracts were at the center of her clashes with the Board of Education.
It was a raw and savage power struggle.
Contract steering has been a problem. They totally bypass the administration and come straight to their committee meeting or the board meeting and introduce vendors for hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars of contracts when we had no money.
By the time Calloway was fired, the DPS deficit was nearing $300 million. Just 7 years earlier, the district had a $100 million surplus. Something was clearly wrong with the district's finances, and Calloway wasn't the only one asking questions.
Mr. Rather, how can you explain $47 million being electronically wired out of the district in a very short period of time and no board member have knowledge of that?
Well, how can that be?
How can that be? I believe that with a budget of $1.2 billion a year, people simply can't resist looting, if you will, the school system's budget for the sake of employment or for the sake of contracts, or it is seen as deep pockets. And therefore, children are pushed to the background and the economic needs of adults become a priority.
My feet are hot. Should wear flip-flops.
All that money, how many books they could have bought? I was buying tissue for the school. They would send home lists of what the kids need for school.
You mean like toilet tissue?
Mm-hmm. Tissue, we brought tissue for the school. We bought Kleenex for so the runny nose or whatever, crayons, paper, and all that. We did that. And I had no problem doing that. I sent extra. But why did I have to buy tissue for a school? They get this money. What are they doing with the money? I never understood. Where's this money going to?
I used to say the very same thing when my children was in the school system, and I would come to every board meeting and I would stand up at that microphone and I would say, the board did it, and I would challenge them just like these particular parents challenge this particular board.
We're playing games, okay? And stop playing games with the children. Oh yeah, I'm venting, sure is venting. Yes, I am venting, yes, I am mad.
But we don't teach in the classrooms. We're not in school buildings on a day-to-day basis. We are actually policy-making body. We don't do the implementation, we set policies. But a lot of people believe when anything go wrong, it's that board that did it.
Those are the law. If you want No Child Left Behind, if you want that money for this and the money for that, you got to follow those things to the letter.
It's clear that the school board takes a lot of heat. But members say it's not fair to put all the blame on them. After all, they say, the state of Michigan took over the schools in 1999 and ran up high budget deficits with no improvement in academic achievement. So when the elected school board returned to power in 2006, public expectations were especially high.
And so the fundamental question that most people raise here is whether or not we can govern ourselves. That really is the underlying question.
Nothing was passed.
I don't think that your board members understand that.
Okay, I want to make sure that the board, there seems to be there's a question of clarity.
Only 10% of that deficit occurred during the reign of this current board, and now everyone's trying to wash their hands and put the blame on this board.
And that was when the state, Governor Granholm, controlled the district and the mayor. So when they put us at high risk, it wasn't the elected school board.
I want everyone to be clear about what they're voting for. We're going to redo the vote.
I thought we were voting on number one.
No.
Can we govern ourselves, or do we need to have a different system of urban education from a governance standpoint that allows either a mayor or a strong CEO to carry forth academic reforms?
But didn't it pass?
It did not pass.
Which way did I vote? Did I vote yes?
Okay, I think since there's such unreadiness.
This school system doesn't have time to tinker around the edges. It doesn't have time to plot.
In March 2009, a new player arrived on the scene.
You know, when I came in, I looked at everything.
The state of Michigan had stepped in once again, and they called in this man, Robert Bobb, to clean up the mess.
I mean, we are in a crisis. Not only are we in a financial crisis, we're also in an academic crisis as well.
Bobb was given the title Emergency Financial Manager.
I have no tolerance for it. I have no tolerance for anyone who takes one red penny of public money. None. Zero. Zilch.
Over the course of 30 years, Robert Bobb has specialized in turning around the finances of depressed urban areas across the country, from Oakland, California, to Washington, D.C.
Now, the world that I live in, you don't issue bonds to cover ongoing operating expenses.
He had a no-nonsense reputation. He wasn't afraid to make enemies. And critics of the school board were starting to take notice.
We told you emergency manager was coming when you kept us 5 and 6 hours and didn't take care of business. Now he's here. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something. Thank God.
The Board of Education now had a direct threat to its power. And many Detroiters saw Bobb as the last best hope for bringing long overdue accountability to the district.
So whoever was lying in their pockets, I hope Mr. Bob surely finds them. Because I want to stand in that courtroom and say, hey, you took our children's future away from them, so yours should be taken away too. Thank you.
Mr. Bobb, do you have any idea how bad the situation is before you took this job?
No.
You heard rumors, you must have heard rumors or read reports.
You know, when I reviewed the financials for prior years, I saw $139.7 million budget deficit. The world that I come out of, piece of cake, we come in, we can take care of that. What I didn't realize is that I would inherit almost another $70, $80 million in budget deficit on a budget that really was a budget that was built on a house of cards.
Okay, because it's a revenue producer that we're looking at.
Bobb told us that in all his years of experience, he had never seen bookkeeping in such shambles as he saw in Detroit.
When I came here, we had over $80 million in late payments. They didn't have the cash to pay many of these vendors. Our book companies, for example, had us on credit watch. When I arrived, we had to go to the state to get an advance to make payroll in April. We took another advance to make payroll in May. We actually had over 500 employees on the payroll without a budget. We had vendor invoices stuck in desk drawers. We have employees with ineligible dependents receiving health care benefits. Some individuals were actually deceased and were still paying their health care benefit. I sent out almost 40 auditors to audit every school.
It's an army of auditors.
Correct. Across the entire school district to audit all of our bank reconciliations, all of the cash that comes into these schools from athletic funds, from music funds, from bake sales. And what we found is that we found individuals who were writing checks for themselves, using the school system as their own personal banker.
Let me just go to the results of these audits because they are disturbing in many, many ways. Only 5 of the 194 schools had entirely proper bookkeeping. 5 of 194 schools.
With the help of his auditing team, Bob bored down into the books of all of Detroit's public schools and surfaced with an embarrassing laundry list of financial missteps.
Lack of documentation, missing cash receipts, improper and unauthorized disbursements, missing series of checks, untimely deposits, financial records removed from the school funds that were diverted to individuals' personal accounts. Where did those records go? Incredible.
This is case number 0962475.
But Bob wasn't content with just documenting fraud and mismanagement.
Count 1, embezzlement, public official over $50.
He vowed to bring people to justice. To date, he has launched about 300 criminal investigations. Many have been referred to the local prosecutor and a handful to the U.S. attorney.
And these are individuals who were allowed to steal from the school system, but in one instance remained employed after 3 years of being videotaped removing computers from a city warehouse.
And when you say from the school district, it's really from the kids.
Oh, it's totally from the kids, absolutely. And so we're recovering everything that we can.
Stolen computers, hundreds of Blackberries, a warehouse of motorcycles. Bob told us they could have a swap meet with all of the questionable materials that have been mysteriously purchased on the school system's dime.
In the end, somebody is responsible. Somebody was supposed to catch this stuff long ago, long before you came in.
I laid the responsibilities clearly on the shoulders of the school board. I was president of a school board. I understand what to do, what your fiduciary responsibilities are. They're the corporate board of a $1.2 billion corporation. They cannot sit idly by and somewhat dismiss the fact that we've had 7 years of overspending. We've had waste, fraud, and abuse. They are the ones who have to hold themselves accountable.
All those in favor, stand adjourned.
Well, is it or is it not the Board of Education's job to be responsible for keeping the financial house in order? Is that
That is correct, but what we do is, as policymakers, we hire individuals to perform those duties for us. And keep in mind, the superintendent is the one that recommends who she would like to work with.
Well, here's where this is going. Should or should not have the Board of Education done more to save the money for the children? Could you have done more?
So you sound like them. Could we have did more to save money for the children? If we do not handle the day-to-day operation, and we hire a superintendent that we pay quite well, over $200-something thousand, and they come to us, we expect them to give us the correct information. And if you have a chief financial officer that comes before you every day and they say the books are balanced, then at some point you have to believe and trust your superintendent, trust your chief financial officer, trust your treasurer, that the information they're providing to the board is correct.
Well, at least one member of the school board, and I think it's shared by others, takes the view, when asked, where were you? In fact, said, you have to understand, Mr. Rather, that it's the superintendent's job to catch these things and bring them to us. Do you buy that?
Well, being from Louisiana, I would say that's alligator dung. This is not the case at all. You hire a CEO, you're over that CEO, you give him or her a contract, and you hold them accountable. You don't just hire a CEO and say, just go out and do, whatever. And then there's evidence where these superintendents actually brought strong recommendations to the board, wherein the board has said, no to those recommendations as well.
I begged for a forensic audit because their annual audit was not complete when I arrived. I begged the state, I begged the school board, I begged the foundations, everyone, and I was told it was too expensive. In lieu of that, I worked with Dr. Mike Casserly from the Council of Great City Schools, and he came in and audited the curriculum department, the finance department, the facilities and maintenance department, the IT department, and procurement.
The audit says, and again I quote, "There is no indication that the budget is aligned with the district's goals, priorities, or actual practices." Tell me about those findings.
Well, those are huge problems. The school district doesn't have priorities and instructional goals. So there's nothing that the finance system can actually align to. On top of that, there is no mechanism in the school district that actually lays out a long-term plan. There is no forecasting. There's no projections about what the school system is likely to face in the coming years. And the school system was just not managing the taxpayer resources in a competent fashion.
Casserly and his team spent 6 months looking at the district and compiled their findings in a detailed report. They listed many examples of wasted money, such as a bloated central office with twice as many employees per student as the average urban district. He discovered some departments had nearly one supervisor for every worker.
And it'd be one thing, maybe you could excuse it, if all of these people were producing a great product and the overall attainment of the kids was getting higher and accelerating, but that's not the case here.
And the board was horrible to them at the meeting. They talked over Dr. Casserly, he shortened his time, board members jumped up and slammed doors and all this. They did all of that when Dr. Casserly tried to give that presentation.
Council of Great City Schools issued a great report. Fantastic roadmap, blueprint. They didn't follow that one. Prior audits identified all of the financial weaknesses in the system. They didn't follow any of those reports. Had they followed 3 major reports that were delivered to them, there would be no need for an emergency financial manager.
We got a revised school code that
Member
said you
Thornton,
have
what is your
vote?
Kids, because they're not supposed to put our kids off the buses. They got ideas.
This is being done because you all mad at Robert Bob.
No, this is dictatorial.
It had to have someone with the autonomy and the authority to report beyond the school board, to move things in Detroit. Please remember that every decision that I made, from anyone who was hired, fired, any building that's closed, had to have their approval. I did not have authority to do any of that.
We're going to build a new Mumford High School.
Mr. Bob has that authority.
But just how far Bob's authority would reach became an extremely contentious issue. School board members insisted they were still in control of academic decisions.
I would say that the academics in this district are second to none.
I mean, out of all the schools in the state of Michigan, you know, you want your child to go to Detroit Public School and one of the best high schools in the country.
We have developed our own academic plan that Mr. Bob is rejecting at this point. At least publicly he rejects it. Behind the scenes though, they take parts of the plan and implement them in terms of their plan. That's what's really going on here.
And the fact is, he has no experience or knowledge of academia. So he's taken over the superintendent's role. And not only that, he has fired most of our academic experts.
We're not going to be intimidated from our position, which is we believe we should be consulted on academic policy. You need to consult with us prior to taking action. You telling us you don't have time? We got all our lives. We've been here all our lives. We got as much time as it takes to get it done right. That's what we want Mr. Bob to understand. We want to do it the right way, not the fast way, because oftentimes being fast is not good.
His contract fully says you must consult with the Board of Education, and he felt that he shouldn't have to.
In August 2009, the Detroit School Board sued Robert Bob for overstepping his authority. According to member Marie Thornton, Bob wasn't staying in his own lane. On a local radio show, Bob had already made his feelings about Thornton and the rest of the school board very clear.
If they had done their job well, then I would still be in my office at 601 Pennsylvania Avenue in Northwestern. I would not have had the phone call from the state of Michigan. We are here because they're the ones who received a triple F for not doing what was right for the students of the Detroit public school system. And this school system, this school board, Ms. Thornton, is part of the failure as to why I'm here.
Bob countersued the school board for spending money without his approval. The board had taken the provocative step of hiring a new superintendent without consulting him. They had promoted one of their own, their former general counsel. Bob said he wouldn't fund the position and questioned the wisdom of hiring a new superintendent without a nationwide search.
He shouldn't be spending a dime in countersuing this board. What he needs to do is sit down with this board and figure out the best mechanism for us to work together. We are not the enemy.
The problem with the Detroit Public Schools and its leadership, particularly at the board level, is that there's this non-recognition of reality. The reality is that we know Johnny is not reading, but we're going to pretend that Johnny is in fact
some
reading.
people would call that denial.
It's total denial. I mean, we can't deny the fact that we have kids coming into the 9th grade reading at the 5th and 6th grade levels. We can't deny the fact that we have kids in the 9th grade that we expect to take pre-algebra, but they cannot read, and yet we want them to perform at these high levels.
Bob, of course, wasn't the first to make these observations. It's what former Superintendent Connie Calloway put in her notebook. It's what Michael Casserly put in the report of his audit. Change is hard, especially when there are no easy decisions. But Bob said many in the district didn't want to face the tough realities.
Because what has happened in the past is they've seen where they've had a declining enrollment. They knew how many employees should be laid off, but they didn't pull the trigger. I've not been afraid to pull the trigger.
We can't teach with 50 students in a class. We can't teach without books and supplies. We have 1,000 teachers laid off, and every single one is going to come back.
What do we want? What do we want it? Now!
As the 2009-2010 school year approached, Bob laid off over 1,000 teachers. He said the district couldn't afford their salaries. The teachers' union rallied in protest.
You can't balance a $400 million deficit on the backs of teachers. It's not going to happen. What other cuts are you willing to make?
The union argued that their members were being unfairly targeted, but Bob was making drastic cuts across the board. He fired scores of principals. He gave pink slips to nearly 3/4 of the district's central office. And he announced that the pace of school closings in Detroit would increase, dozens more over the next few years. All of this in an effort to turn the schools around.
We only have one objective, one goal, one mission, and that is to do everything that's in our power to make sure that you get the very best education you deserve and never let anyone tell you that you don't deserve the best education. So, are you in? Are you in? Are you in? DPS, we're all in.
Bob launched a giant public relations campaign called I'm In, which culminated in a huge pep rally for parents, teachers, and students a week before the start of the school year.
Okay, hi, it's Emmanuel Ogwald reporting live downtown at the DPS Back to School Parade. What is the importance of today? What is it symbolic of?
Well, it's symbolic of the fact that we have to keep our kids enrolled in the Detroit public schools. Everyone who's currently in school, we want all of the children who are currently enrolled to return back to the Detroit public schools, and we want new kids to re-enroll in Detroit public schools if they left the school system last year.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Bob.
It might seem odd that a district with such financial problems would spend $500,000 on a PR campaign, but it highlighted a predicament that Bob had to confront.
You're doing a darn good job. Put them all in jail.
He had spent months talking about how bad the Detroit public schools were, how academic achievement was low, and how the system had failed. Now, he had to sell those same schools to skeptical parents who were looking at alternatives, charter schools, for example, or moving to another district.
And why should I have to pay, as a single parent, $94 for registration to pull them out of DPS to put them in an academy or a charter?
You shouldn't have to pay one nickel.
I shouldn't, but the
Give me your
Detroit
name
DPS found them.
Let me have your name and
Bob approached the task like a politician, campaigning door to door, media in tow.
Is this Miss Riley?
Yes, I am.
How are you doing? I'm Robert Bob.
Excellent.
And like many politicians, he had gotten a key celebrity endorsement.
This man means business.
Entertainer and education advocate Bill Cosby, who'd seen a news story about Robert Bob and volunteered to come to Detroit to help him out.
And we're going to talk to people and try and get them to understand the seriousness of a child left without a reason to understand math.
The press took notice, but they had many hard questions about what Bob and Cosby were actually selling.
Our station spoke with a woman yesterday who lives right near Henry Ford High School, and her child does attend a charter school. She said it would take more than Bill Cosby. It would take Jesus himself. She is so afraid to send her child to the public schools.
So Jesus can, what are you looking at me for? Now, having said that, here's the point. I don't think I've signed on to yank people out of charter school. I've seen charter schools. They're magnificent, some of them. Huh? Some, but I tell you what, we're not there to yank people away who don't believe. We're trying to get people whose children have to come to public school to begin to behave in a manner that they're bringing their children to the school, that the truancy rate begins to fall. We want to build a relationship. That's why he's here.
But now we need to enroll your daughter in the Detroit Public School.
Yes.
Well, if I'm a parent, why would I put my child into that school system or back into that school system? Why wouldn't I say, God bless Mr. Robert Bob and his efforts, but these are my kids, they only get one shot. I'm going to take them to a private school, charter school, or take them to the suburbs.
That's a very excellent question. I mean, I hear it all the time, and I don't blame them. I say to parents, you do what's right for your kid. What we're going to do is we're going to have a plan that gets move this legacy deficit out of your way. We're going to make sure that the funds that needs to get to the classroom for your kids will get to the classroom. We're going to make sure that you have great leaders in these school buildings and there's enough rigor in those classrooms for your kids. And we're going to make sure that our school campuses are safe. I say, give us a chance with your child.
Well, as you know, this gentleman, Mr. Robert Bob, has come in to help the school system. Have you heard about him?
Yes.
Well, what do you think? Can he do it?
I think it is admirable that he is putting up the effort. Very good job for getting out to the media. But no, nobody is going to come back to DPS because nobody wants to send their child to a school where they're not learning anything. Nobody wants to send, would you send your child to a school where there are children in the hallway because they would rather not go to class, where there are fights, where the textbooks are tattered and torn? Nobody wants to send their children to something like that. They want their children to have the best.
Come on, people.
You say come back to DPS, make DPS better.
But thousands of Detroit parents feel they have little choice but to send their children to their local public school, even though they know it may be failing. They don't have the means to move to the suburbs or pay for a private school. And charter schools, all question of their merit set aside, have a limited number of spots, often relegated to heartbreaking lotteries. one of the grim realities of our national crisis in education is that in places like Detroit, school often takes a backseat to the hardships of life.
It's the first day of school, which sucks.
Although Deanna is passionate about learning, her past 3 years at Henry Ford have been rocky. As she entered her senior year, her grade point average was low, and she told us she had to fight the feeling that coming to school was mostly a waste of time. Robert Bobb had promised there would be big changes inside these buildings, starting with what he called the school's CEO, the principal.
When there's a problem in a building, I'm not going to search. Don't tell me about the teacher down the hall. I want to know what the hell you've done about it.
Bob personally interviewed every principal in every school across the district, and they were only rehired if Bob felt like they were capable of maintaining a standard of excellence. Dr. Lane Hunt was about to start his day as the new principal of Henry Ford.
Mr. Duma, did you get those computers put in the office?
You know, he's the individual whom we're going to look for to determine whether or not there's discipline in the building, the school climate is correct, but more importantly, is real teaching and learning taking place in the school building.
It was the first day of the school year. Bob had been in Detroit only 7 months. He'd angered the school board by getting involved in academic decisions as much as financial ones. And now it was time to see whether Robert Bobb would be the agent of change these schools so desperately needed.
That's what they teach.
If the first week at Henry Ford High School was any indication, it was not going to be smooth sailing.
Students who have VOTEC, you will report to the cafeteria.
Deanna's sister, Isis, spent the first 3 hours of school waiting in the cafeteria, along with hundreds of other students. They all had an off-campus vocational training class on their schedules, but it was canceled because the bus driver never showed up.
Those other kids shouldn't be out of the cafeteria.
This is the beginning of the year, so it's real common for us to just sit around and not do nothing a lot.
VOTEC students, you need to be here at 7 a.m. in the morning.
You need to be here at 7 a.m.
Hey.
Deanna may not have been excited about the new school year, but she told us she was looking forward to her first class, Honors English.
We're going to get started right away. Okay, as a matter of fact, you will probably get your books tomorrow.
So we're going to be immediately getting our books?
Yes.
In past years, Deanna's mother had had to call the school to ask why her daughter hadn't received any textbooks. So the prospect of getting them on the second day of school was big news.
We don't have time to issue you your books today, but tomorrow.
Tomorrow, she said we're going to start getting our books and stuff. And I guess some other things are going to happen tomorrow. But I know we're getting our books tomorrow.
But on the second day of class...
When do you get your books? I have them. I did put them in the room, and you're going to look at them today, but I'm not going to issue it to you today.
A month into the school year, Deanna said the textbooks still hadn't been issued.
Are you supposed to sit down or just wait for somebody to come?
I don't know.
I want to wait for somebody to come.
No teacher showed up to Isis's algebra class. Remember, Isis had spent the first 3 hours of her day sitting in the cafeteria.
Oh, this is algebra what? Algebra 3, okay. If somebody doesn't come in here, although I'm sure they will, make sure they all sign your schedules. And if not, I'll come back.
But 3 weeks into the school year, there still was no teacher, and eventually the class was combined with another, bringing the class count to over 50 students.
I don't have a teacher for Spanish. It was closed and the lights were off, and then I asked the teacher next door, is that still the Spanish room? And she told me to go downstairs to the office, and then a lady at the office told me to come down here.
Deanna was sent to the cafeteria to wait because No one showed up to teach her third-hour Spanish class. On the second day of school, Deanna found a substitute teacher had been assigned to the Spanish class.
You know what?
Deanna told us she'd been in this situation before,
Where do I go to change my classes?
and that she didn't want to waste time in a class without a permanent teacher.
Thank you.
She was sent to the office to try to change her schedule.
Who's your Spanish?
But at the office, Deanna couldn't get anyone to understand the difference between having a teacher to teach her Spanish and a substitute teacher babysitting the class.
I just left from up there 2 minutes ago.
You have to
And
go
stopped
to
in
the
and said he was all right.
You
I
just said that he wasn't there. That's what you just said. You said there's no teacher there. That's what you said.
And they told us in the office to just go to class and keep going to class until the counselors can switch our classes around. And there are only 2 counselors, so who knows when that might happen.
On the fourth day of class, there was neither a teacher nor a substitute.
What class is this?
Spanish.
Where's your teacher?
Y'all ain't got no teachers? Y'all supposed to be in French. Y'all in the wrong classroom. Y'all the teacher coming in the classroom is Miss Harani French. Y'all gotta go over to her classroom.
Eventually, a music teacher was assigned to the class. Deanna shot this video with a camera we provided her.
This is my last year of school, and this is why I'm so upset about it.
Your credits.
Yes. I think it's wrong that it's been 2 weeks and we don't have a Spanish teacher, and then they send a music teacher in to teach us Spanish.
We don't have anybody else right now.
I may not know the details or the more intricate parts, but you gotta trust me that I know the beginning. Got it?
It took Deanna nearly a month to successfully transfer out of this class.
They're your employee. All I do is pay the bill.
All right, how many hours?
3 hours a day.
New principal Lane Hunt was also having a rough few days.
This is one of those classes where the teachers didn't show up. We were supposed to get 7 teachers. Actually, 2 showed up. I'm getting ready to call and see where Randolph's schedule is. I don't know where the bus driver is.
Okay, because I'm one of those parents that is taking my child out of the charter school in the suburbs. And I'm giving it a try, but I want to know that he's safe.
First hour was small, 8 people. Second hour was 14. Third hour was like 22.
Dr. Hunt was worried about how few students were showing up for school.
Fourth hour is usually the busiest line.
At the end of the first week, there were just over 800.
So 820.
826.
How many did we have last year?
Total about 1,300.
Okay, so we got a little ways to go.
You got a little ways to go.
It seemed that Bob was running into a cultural headwind that was beyond his control. He was learning that in Detroit, it's not a given that students will show up on the first day of school, or even in the first 2 weeks. His I'm In campaign hadn't changed that.
And this man comes to Detroit like a hired gunfighter. So we got a lot of problems around here. So people riding through town stealing, drinking, picking on this, doing that, and not caring about the children.
But Bill Cosby's message was much bigger than Robert Bob or even Detroit. It was a cultural criticism about the state of education in poor urban areas.
If you let your child wander around the street and say that he admires the drug dealer, you might as well turn him loose to the Klan, too. Protect your children. Education.
Education is important. As Cosby says, it's the way we protect our children.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, really quick.
But as Deanna went through her senior year, her frustrations with her school continued to mount.
Sometimes it's really boring. At times it's like, what in the world am I doing here? And sometimes it's just like, I'm not at school at all. I'm just somewhere waiting to go home.
So Deanna stopped showing up and began counting the days to when she could hopefully leave the Detroit schools behind for the promise of college.
If you love yourself and you value your mind and you don't want it to turn to applesauce, do not come to Ford. Save yourself the trouble and the agony and the tutoring when you get to college.
Whose fault is that? Is it the teacher's fault? Is it
It's everybody's fault. It's the kids for not taking care of the building, for not taking responsibility for what they need to do, for doing the things that they do to give the school a bad name. It's the administration and the teacher's fault for not having a good rein on the kids. They say that the clothing is a problem and they give us uniforms. The clothing is not the problem. It's that you're not getting through to the children that's the problem. It's the parents' fault because the parents won't work with the teachers and the counselors and the administration to make sure that their kids are doing what they need to do. It is the board's fault for stealing from the children and not giving us what we need and not telling their administration what they need to do. It is the mayor's fault and the governor's fault for not paying attention to what is happening in the city of Detroit. It is everybody's fault. Everybody has had a hand in this, and it is time for everybody to take responsibility for what has happened.
Deanna Williams.
Stop. I gotta keep going. I'm going to school at Eastern Michigan University. Great! Yeah.
If there's a happy ending to this story, it's that Deanna made it out. She graduated from Henry Ford and was the first in her family to be accepted to a 4-year college. But this day almost didn't happen.
I know we almost didn't make it. And now, even if she goes to college, it just helps her.
There is no choice but for me to succeed in college.
We hear a lot about inspiring children from communities like this to have the drive to succeed. Deanna had the drive, but there was a shocking disconnect. Her grades and test scores were low, and it seemed the school didn't care that she was falling through the cracks. Our production team found it nearly impossible to watch this happening to her, so we decided to step in and help. We found Deanna and her sister Isis a volunteer tutor, and after only a few sessions, their practice test scores jumped tremendously. We also helped Deanna navigate the tricky college admissions process and made sure she understood the financial options available to her. In the end, we didn't do much more than an average high school counselor. But Deanna wasn't getting this information at school.
I thank you. Thank you so much. You guys are part of this also. And that should be in there, that without your influence, I don't know. But I appreciate it. I really, really do.
Come on, sister.
A few months before graduation, a family crisis threw another wrench into the works. Deanna's sister, Isis, left school and ran away from home. The family didn't want to go into too many details, but ultimately Katina lost her job at Target because she missed so many days of work trying to deal with a troubling situation.
Good evening. My name is Robert Bob. I serve as the Emergency Financial Manager for the Detroit Public Schools.
Robert Bob, excuse me.
By the time the school year was drawing to a close, communication between Bob and the school board had broken down completely.
We have no information regarding the finances of the district.
A district court had to order them to meet to discuss the budget.
On April 19th, we provided you with both the detailed facilities plan and the academic plan.
Quite frankly, we never got it.
We never got it.
But it's not my fault that you haven't received this.
Excuse me.
This was the last public meeting we attended, where once the anger had been directed at the board, now Robert Bobb was in the crosshairs.
I want to commend the board for standing with the people, the students, the teachers, and the parents against this heinous effort by Bob to destroy public education in our city. We will win.
He had upset the teachers' union.
You know, your sign said when school started, we are DPS, we are in, you kicking us out.
He had closed a lot of schools.
You came in as a financial manager, now you want to go into academics. That's not your place. You have lined your pockets with the money that belongs to our children. You need to check yourself.
And the district's deficit had only increased under his watch.
Robert Bobb is a criminal, and we are going to expose him.
Bob said this was the price of being honest with the numbers and of laying a foundation for the future. But Detroit's patience with his policies had come to an end.
And while you're there in D.C., you need to stay there and don't go around the country terrorizing black cities.
Excuse me, Mr. Bob.
Excuse me.
My name is Miss Wills, and I'm going to talk to you about student records that are still being missed.
Bob left the meeting in disgust, while the community continued to vent their anger.
The strategy should be, if you really want to get at Robert Bobb, is to attack his credibility. One good way to do that is look at what he's doing.
For too long, our country has dealt with systemic failures, like the schools in Detroit, by looking the other way. We say we want change, but we're not patient enough to realize that digging ourselves out of decades of neglect will take more than a few months, or even years. When Robert Bobb announced he would leave Detroit when his term ended in the spring of 2011, many in the community and the local press treated his tenure as a failure. The deficit, after all, had gone up, whereas student test scores had not. And whether Bob's policies were misguided or whether they would have paid off in the future is a place for honest debate. But as we struggle with our nation's most difficult problems, we must start with an honest accounting. And Bob's efforts to do that, like similar efforts by former Superintendent Connie Calloway before him, were met with denial, contempt, and political posturing by those invested in the status quo. Sadly, this is a phenomenon not limited to Detroit or even to our national crisis in education. On tough issue after tough issue, we have allowed ourselves to confuse finger-pointing with problem-solving and self-serving distortions with a fidelity to the truth. We need to demand more from our leaders and ourselves. If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.